Hi, my name is Metin Teke, and you're watching Perspectives on Faith. This show aims to explore the expressions of the sacred in faith, in prayer, in ritual, and in theology. We hope to cover both the theological basis of faith as well as contemporary issues relating to faith in today's world. On this edition of Perspectives on Faith, we will talk about death and afterlife in Islam. Our guest today is Dr. Amir Hussain. He is a professor of Islamic Studies at Loyola Marymount University in Los Angeles. Dr. Hussain, welcome to our show.
Thank you for having me here.
I'm interested to know, what were the prevailing views on death in pre-Islamic Arabia?
In pre-Islamic Arabia, you had a society that was pagan and polytheistic, and people really weren't concerned with the afterlife. You know, the life that was important was the life that you lived. You lived that life, you died. People weren't really sure what happened after you died. If bad things had happened, you might come back, you know, as a ghost to avenge certain kinds of things. But really, it was the life of the world that was important.
What do other revealed scriptures say on this topic of resurrection or life after death? Scriptures such as the Bible, Torah, the Gospels.
I think if you look at the Bible, early Judaism was kind of like pre-Islamic Arabia, same kind of thing. You know, there's the world of the living, world of the dead, not really sure what happens to the dead, we're not really concerned about that. Then you've got later in the biblical text this idea of an afterlife, which gets picked up in Christianity, that it's not this life that's important, it's the world to come that's the more important world.
What was the Quranic message in regards to death and the afterlife?
The Quranic message, I think, was radically different from the pre-Islamic message, which was the idea in the Quran that this world is not the most important world, this life is not the most important life, that you live this life, and how you live that life determines what happens in the world to come. That there is a final judgment, that God will judge people based on the things that they have done, and those who earn the reward will get that reward, those who earn the punishment will get that punishment. And so the notion that this world is not the end.
Mm-hmm. Why has the Quran emphasized this, that this world is not the end, as you said, so the resurrection comes into play so much over other issues or beliefs?
I think for Muslims, the Quran very much is a book that talks about justice and righteousness. And this has to do with notions of the justice of God. That, you know, God gives us free will. God allows us as human beings to do what we want. That said, God gives us guidance. God tells us the way that we should live our lives. And Muslims, like Jews and Christians, see our history as a prophetic history. Human history is prophetic history. The prophets, ending as Muslims with the Prophet Muhammad, tell us how we should live in the world. And if we follow that, then we get the reward. If we don't follow that, we're free to do evil and commit evil deeds, but we will face a punishment for that. So I think it really is that fundamental justice of God notion that's stressed here.
Does divine wisdom require the existence of the hereafter?
I think so. I mean, you know, if all you're talking about is this world, then it just matters how much I accumulate in this world. If all I'm doing is living for this world, I don't really care about the hereafter, I don't really think about that, then there's no need to work on anything like that, you know. But if you begin to realize that this world itself isn't eternal, this world was created by God, this world will be ended at a certain point in time by God who began this world, and that this world is temporal. It's the world to come that is eternal. And all those things that we want, you know, we all want happiness, we want success, we want health, those kinds of things, but we want them forever. We don't want them just for a short period of time. I don't want to be happy just today. I don't want to be wealthy just for this weekend. You know, I want this for, ideally, the rest of my life. What about
there's an infinite desire, saying, in man?
Well, I think so, and that infinite desire for things that are eternal. You know, we don't want to be, as I said, just happy today. We don't want to be just wealthy tomorrow. We want this for eternity, and eternity implies the world to come.
These qualities are somehow manifesting in the other world, you're saying?
Absolutely, absolutely. You know, in the world to come, it is that perfect world. It is that world that is eternal. So all the sorrows, all the pain, all the suffering, all the problems that we undergo, in this life, that won't be there in the world to come if we've done the right kinds of things. If we haven't, then the punishments are, worse because they're eternal. It's not just that you're miserable for a short period of time. It's you're miserable for eternity.
We want to be loved as human beings, I guess.
Absolutely.
Everyone wants that. And the way we signify love, but deep down, truly, we want God's love, you're saying.
Absolutely.
And that could be only infinitely attained in the other world.
Mm-hmm. And we have God's love. I think that's the other issue there, that, it's like our parents. We're looking for our parents to love us, but of course our parents love us if they're decent parents. If they're psychotic parents, something else, that's a different thing.
Yes.
But God is like that. God is that parent who loves us, who cares for us, who gives us this tremendous wisdom through the prophets, gives us our ability to think, to reason, to be rational human beings. And so we have those capacities, and God loves us and wants us to do certain things. But of course, like any parent, it's the freedom. You want your child to do certain things, but your child is autonomous. Past a certain age, you can't make your child do anything. And as a good parent, you give them the tools with which to succeed and hope that they use those tools.
This is a follow-up question to the question about divine wisdom. So why are we here? What's the purpose of this life? I guess it's training, a place where we develop our attributes, ourselves,
absolutely,
in relation to the afterlife. So could you elaborate on that? What does Islam say about this?
I think it goes back to the very beginning.
There's suffering in this world, for example. What's
Absolutely.
the purpose of suffering?
Absolutely. And that's that question that everyone is always asked in religious history. Why do the righteous suffer? Not just suffering, but why is it that good people suffer? Why is it that wicked people seem to prosper? You turn on the news, and you have all these people who we would think of as bad people, who have great lifestyles. You have all these people that we think of as very good, sincere people who are suffering from diseases, ill health, all those kinds of things.
Yes.
And the idea again here is that this is temporal. We live a certain amount of time. God has determined that life for us, meaning that lifespan for us. So we could live 20 years, we could live 100 years, we could live 120 years, but no one lives forever. And the idea is that it's how you live this life that determines what happens in the world to come. And so that becomes important. It's suffering, it's in and of itself, is not a terrible thing. The Quran tells us, one of my favorite verses is that, we will not burden a soul more than it can bear. That, God doesn't place burdens on us greater than what we can hold.
That's fascinating.
Well, it's like a coach. We play sports and a coach makes us do certain things, but the coach isn't going to do anything that'll, physically harm us. We may think, I can't run that extra lap. I don't really want to run those extra 2 miles. But you can do it, and the coach knows you can do it. You need to know that you can do it. So I think in that sense, it's that trial. Rumi, the wonderful, wonderful mystic, one of my favorite poems of his is the analogies of chickpeas. We as human beings are chickpeas that the housewife has bought from the market, and she throws us into the pot of boiling water. And as chickpeas, we say, what are you doing? You bought us. You bought us because we're these wonderful chickpeas. You chose us, not the other ones. Why are you putting us in this pot of boiling water? Why are we being burned in this thing? And the idea is that you need to do this in order to bring out the flavor. You need to do this in order to, have the chickpeas, who of course are us, experience these kinds of things. That we need that experience. We need that kind of training. I can give my students a certain intellectual knowledge, but until they've experienced it themselves, they don't really know it. It's the idea that that's what this world is. And in the world to come, that's where all these things are eternal. That's where the righteous who may have suffered get their reward, not just for 10 minutes, not just for 10 years, but for eternity.
So it appears from the analogy about the coach, suffering enables us to realize our fullest potential.
Absolutely, absolutely. And that it's done with a purpose. It's not, blind suffering. It's not sort of fate that controls the universe and it doesn't matter, what happens. The idea that God is there, is in control of things. And so, we get, very simply, what we deserve. We may not get it in this lifetime, but we'll certainly get it in the world to come.
What were the responses of the pagan Arabs to this message in the Quran about the resurrection, afterlife?
They, like the other responses, they didn't like this. I mean, you've got a society that's polytheistic. Here's Muhammad preaching that there's one and only one God. You've got a society that's very materialistic. Here's Muhammad preaching that those who have an obligation to those who don't have. You've got a society that says all that matters is this world. You know, I need to build up my kingdom here. I need to be the wealthiest man, you know, in this particular town. Here's the prophet saying that that's not important. It's how you treat other people. It's how you live your life. And so, not surprisingly, this is not a message that's well received by the pagan Arabs, you know, until such time as they begin to convert to Islam and begin to realize the truth of the message that Muhammad is bringing.
Were there any attempts to intellectually refute the resurrection?
Oh, absolutely, because, you know, it takes that leap of faith to believe this. You know, you can very easily point to a dead body, to a corpse, to a skeleton, and say, well, look, you know, I can see what happens to the body after death. You know, if you just leave the dead body out there, it decomposes, it decays, it becomes bones. Well, what's the point of all this? Exactly, that's all there is. It's that material.
Argument.
Absolutely, all that there is that material existence. What you want to say is there's much more to it than that. The body isn't what's important, it's the soul. C.S. Lewis is a wonderful Christian theologian, and he once remarked, people talking about the body and soul, you know, that you have a soul. And he said, no, you are a soul. You have a body. You know, the body is temporal. The body lasts 20 years, 50 years, 120 years, but it decays and goes away. The soul is that thing which is eternal. But of course, I can't show you that in the way that I can show you your skeleton, your muscles, your bones.
And Islam has the same theology.
Absolutely.
Concerning the body and the soul.
That
we are a soul.
We are a soul, and the soul is what's important. The soul is what's eternal.
And the soul would be the nafs, I presume.
Absolutely.
Nafs.
The Arabic term.
The initial recipients to the message of the Quran about the resurrection, did they believe in a soul?
Not really. I mean, what was important was the body. What was important was the life. That, you know, there may be this afterlife. We're not really sure what happens in that afterlife. There may be, it would be more like almost, not so much a soul, but a ghost, you know, that if a family member has died and hasn't been avenged, then their ghost might come back, you know, seeking vengeance, that kind of thing. So I wouldn't say that that's the same thing at all as the soul. There might be a spirit that kind of lives on, but only for a short period of time. So really not that same notion of the soul.
According to Islamic theology, why does death exist? I mean, why do we die?
I think it goes back to that Adam and Eve question, that, you know, Adam and Eve are created in the Garden of Paradise, and they have this eternal paradise. But they're not meant for that paradise, you know. They sin. God tells them to do certain things and not do certain things, and they disobey God. For that, they're cast out of paradise and onto this earth. But the understanding is that we eventually will get back to that paradise. And so human life is temporal. Human life is a trial for the world to come. You know, how we live in this world determines what happens in the world to come. And so the death is all things that are mortal, all things that are created have a lifespan. It may be a very long lifespan of trees that live 3,000 years. It may be a very short lifespan, but everything that is created passes away. The only thing that doesn't, of course, is the eternal, is God.
In Islamic theology, is it both Adam and Eve who sin? Who bears?
Absolutely, and that's one of the differences between the story in the Quran and the story in the Bible, that in the biblical story, it's Eve who is tempted by the serpent, you know, the devil, and she's the one in turn who tempts Adam. In the Quranic story, it's both of them, which I think is a wonderful idea here, that both the man and his wife are tempted by evil. It's not that the woman is inherently bad, she's the one that leads the man to do the wrong thing. It's that the devil leads both men and women to do the wrong thing. So in that sense, a very different understanding of the story for Muslims in the Quran as opposed to Jews and Christians in the Bible.
What is death? Does the spirit die? You might have touched upon this earlier, but...
No, the spirit, the soul doesn't die. That's what is eternal. That, of course, our bodies are temporal. You know, cells are born, cells regenerate at a certain point, they stop doing that. You know, our body gives way. You look at it as a car, for example, you know, that analogy that we drive a car, we may take care of a car, and it may last for a long period of time, but eventually it will decay, it will go away. The soul is the thing that is eternal. So death means the end of the physical body. It doesn't mean the end of the eternal soul.
The famous poet, mystic poet, Jalaluddin Rumi, referring to death, called it a wedding night. What did he mean by that?
Yeah. Rumi is such a wonderful, wonderful poet, and that analogy that he often uses of the lover and the beloved, that he is the lover seeking his beloved. And it's that notion of analogies. I can't tell you what it means to long for God, but maybe you've been in love. And if you've been in love, maybe you've had the misfortune of being separated from your beloved who's far away from you, and you yearn to be reunited with your beloved. Now, at the beginning of that is the wedding, of course. The first opportunity you have to fully experience your beloved is on your wedding night. And that's the analogy, I think, for Rumi. That's what death is, that encounter with the divine, with God. And so we may talk about it as going to meet your maker. Some of us may be a little scared of that because we may have done things that we're not particularly proud of. Others of us, it's that sense of meeting your beloved. You're away on a business trip and you come home, and there's nothing nicer than having someone that cares for you pick you up at the airport, your beloved who's there to meet you, to greet you, to say, you're home. What better beloved could any of us have than the one who's created us, God? And so that analogy works on so many different levels, that it's waiting for the beloved. It's the union with the beloved. It's that first night of intimacy where you really get to encounter the other person, on the wedding night. That's that encounter with God.
Please stay with us, as we'll be back momentarily. We wish to hear from you, so please forward your comments to perspectives@ebru.tv. Thanks for staying with us. We are back with Dr. Amir Hussain, discussing death and afterlife in Islam. Dr. Hussain, what kind of life or existence does the deceased have?
The deceased has the eternal existence. We talk about what happens immediately after death, and the idea that our deeds are revealed. Our hands will tell what our hands have done, our feet will tell what our feet have done, that we have angels that record our deeds, and they will let God know, what we've done. That there is that notion of a resurrection, of a final judgment, that the grave is not the end of this existence. You're born, you live, you die. When you die, you're buried. But that's not
what
the
happens
end.
immediately after you die in Islamic theology?
The understanding is that immediately after you die, you're visited by angels.
Why do angels visit?
The angels are crucial in Islam. We talk about articles of faith in Islam, and the fundamental article is Tawheed, the oneness of God. There is one and only one God. We say that every day as Muslims in the Shahada, La ilaha illallah. There is no God but God. Belief in God is central, but then there's belief in God's angels, belief in God's messengers, belief in God's books. And so the angels are crucial. It's the angel who brings revelation, for example, to the prophet. It's angels who do all sorts of things, including the notion of the angel of death. We talk about that what does it mean when souls are taken back to where they came from? So you have that sort of notion. But going back to the question of what happens immediately after you die, you've got the angels that ask you, who were you? What do you believe? Who is your prophet? Who is your imam? Who is your prayer leader? In that kind of way. And that the idea is that for us, there's no time difference between when we die and the day of resurrection. The day of resurrection, the end of the world, could happen tomorrow. It could happen 10,000 years from now. It could happen 1,000,000 years from now. But it will happen, you know. But time is this concept, of course, that's important to us. Eternal time is a very different kind of thing. And so that you're asked these particular questions by the angels. You're brought up to God, that you're resurrected. The central rite, if you will, of the Hajj, of the pilgrimage, is the standing at Arafat, you know, on the plain where it's almost like a dress rehearsal. This will be like what it's like on the Day of Judgment, when you're standing before God, and everyone will stand before God and will be judged by God, and they will tell God what they have done. But of course, there's no lying before God, and our body will confess what it has done. The angels, in the Islamic understanding, you know, the angels that sit on our shoulders, that record our deeds, they will just simply recite the text of what it is that we have done, and we'll get the reward for it. And the Quran goes into great detail about heaven and the rewards of those who are righteous. It also goes into great detail about hell and the rewards, the punishments, excuse me, for those who are wicked and have done bad things. And these things are eternal, so that bliss of heaven is eternal, that torment of hell is eternal.
There's a passage that comes to mind in the Quran where every atom of good deed done will be rewarded, and every atom of evil done will be punished. Yeah. It's interesting.
And that's one of my favorite. That's Surah 99, Surah Zalzala, you know, of the Quran. That's one of my favorite surahs. I happen to live in Southern California, you know, where you get earthquakes all the time. And this chapter is the chapter of the earthquake. And the idea is that God, who began the world, will end the world. Literally everything that is in the earth will be brought forward. And there's a wonderful allusion in that chapter of the Quran to a pregnant woman giving birth. You know, that which is inside will be revealed. It's exactly like that notion of, you know, the child that comes out of the mother's womb, that all of us that are buried in the earth, you know, all of us who have died will be brought forward from that. Yeah, it's a beautiful analogy there, that the gender nuances there are just beautiful. But that line at the end, those who have done an atom's weight worth of good will see it. Those who have done an atom's weight worth of evil will see it. And of course, that's both of us. You know, all of us have done, even the worst person has done some good thing in their life. Even the best person has done something that they're not proud of. That, you know, we're, as human beings, we do good things and we do bad things. Some of us may do a whole lot more good things than bad things. Some of us may do a whole lot more bad things than good things. But we get the reward for the good that we've done and the punishment for the evil that we've done.
You mentioned standing at Arafah, and this kind of foreshadows our standing in front of God on the Day of Judgment. Could it also point backwards to a moment when we were in front of God, or standing in front of God in the past, when we were in the realm of spirits?
Absolutely, and it goes back to that notion of Adam and Eve that we were talking about earlier, that the idea that, you know, God creates us out of the clay, and God breathes life into us and gives us life, and God tells His other creation that we, human beings, are the best of creation. You know, it's very powerful kinds of things that we use that metaphor of the garden, you know, of getting back to the garden. There's a very famous 1960s song by a woman named Joni Mitchell about Woodstock, you know, the rock music festival. We've got to get ourselves back to the garden. I mean, that's very much a Quranic theme, that we came from the Garden of Eden. We came from paradise. It's there we return. It goes back to Rumi, you know, the wonderful, wonderful beginning to his massive book of poems is the reed. You know, here's the reed that's growing in the riverbed, and it's perfectly happy in the riverbed. And then here it is plucked, and the flute maker takes that cane reed and makes it a flute, and the flute sings this song of lament, of wanting to be back where it came from, wanting to be back in that garden. And that, of course, is us. You know, and that analogy, I mean, Rumi is a genius for so many reasons, one of which is that analogy works on so many levels, because the same reeds that we use for the flutes are the source of the best pens that we use for calligraphy. So the reed flute that plays this song of lament is the pen that writes the words of the Quran, is us who long to get back to that pre-existence, if you will.
Interesting. What kind of argument or arguments does the Quran put forth to convince its detractors that the resurrection is real?
I think it puts forward that basic argument that, God who began the world will end the world. God is the one that gave us life. We as human beings can do tremendous things. I mean, if you look at the technological advances these days, all those wonderful things, but we don't control cloning, all those kinds of things, but we don't control, life or death. We can't bring things to life. We can kill things, but we can't bring things to life. And that's what God alone can do. And the idea, of course, that we look at the bones. You look at that pagan pre-Islamic notion that, well, these dry bones, who's going to revive these bones? The same person that brought them life in the first place. God who has this infinite power to create life, which we don't have. One of the many, many things, of course, that God's able to do that we're not able to do. And so that God, who gave life to these creatures in the first place, of course is able to give life to these creatures in the world to come. And that the world to come is this wonderful, wonderful kind of world. If we look at all the beauty around this world, you magnify that by an infinite amount.
What were some of the sayings of the Prophet Muhammad in building his community on this basis of the resurrection?
I think a number of different sayings there. One of them we've already talked about. It's not a saying of the Prophet. It comes from God in the Quran. The Surah Zalzala, this chapter of the earthquake of what happens in the fact that we all stand before God. There's also notions of intercession. The idea that the Prophet will be the one that can intercede for us, because according to that surah, we've all done an atom's weight worth of good. We've all done an atom's weight worth of evil. And that as long as we believe in that first principle, that principle of Tawheed, there is no God but God. The Prophet has said that he will intercede for everyone who says that there is no God but God, no God but Allah, using the Arabic terms there. I think that's absolutely crucial. The other one that gives solace to me, and there's lots of them, I'm just picking the ones that are my favorite, is people ask about hell. Is there really such a thing? Is there really such a thing as this eternal punishment? And the Prophet, is in tears when he's asked this, and he says very cryptically but very beautifully, would a mother throw her child into the flames? And we talked about the notion of God as this parent who loves us. Of course, our parents love us. God, of course, loves us more than anyone else, because God, of course, is greater than anything else. When we say in the call to prayer, Allahu Akbar, that doesn't mean God is great. That doesn't mean God is the greatest. Akbar in Arabic is the comparative form. God is greater. No matter what we can think of, God is greater. Our parents love us. God loves us.
God's love is greater.
God's love is greater than anyone's love for us. And just like any parent who loves their child, her child in this case, would you cause harm to your child? No. Would you throw your child in the flames of hell? No. There's that kind of thing. Another favorite, and this happens, I think partly because I happen to live in Los Angeles, which is a culture that's obsessed with beauty and what people look like. There's a hadith, a saying, where an old woman comes to the Prophet and says, is there room in paradise for old women? Will there be old women in paradise? And the Prophet says, no. And the woman is, astounded, hurt, and the Prophet, of course, smiles and says, in paradise, everyone will be in their most perfect form, which again is this wonderful kind of thing, because we look at our bodies as we get older. We talked about athletes, there's a point in your life where you can't do the things that you used to do when you were young and when you were strong, There's a point where your body starts to decay, where you need to help. Someone needs to help you to walk. Someone needs to help you, get from the bed to the chair. That's not the form that you're going to be in. The idea that you're in this eternal form. I think that helps people to understand that it really is about eternal life, not about this temporal life. In this temporal life, I may have this problem with my leg. I may have this disease. In the world to come, I don't have that. And I think that hope is such a tremendous one.
You mentioned that we are souls. Does our actions somehow have an effect on our souls? If we perform acts of evil, does it corrupt ourselves? or the opposite, righteous acts, beautifies ourselves.
Absolutely, and the Quran over and over again stresses those who have faith, who believe in God, that the basic principle of Islam, repeated all the time in the Shahada, in the faith statement, La ilaha illallah, there's no God but God. So those who believe that and do good works, do righteous deeds, the idea that Islam is an ethical monotheism, that we have to believe in monotheism. There is one and only one God. But the ethical part of that is because we believe that there's one and only one God, unlike, let's say, the pagan Arabs who are polytheistic. For them, they have a particular tribe who has this God that's worshipped. They have another tribe that has that goddess that's worshipped. They have another tribe that has that God that's worshipped. And there's no need to take care of each other. As a monotheist, you can't do that. The ethical monotheism says, if there's only one God, and you are created by that God, and I am created by that God, then I have some obligations to you. I have to take care of you because you're my brother. I have to take care of my sisters because they're my sisters, and we're all brothers and sisters to each other. And absolutely the good things that we do are rewarded. They ennoble us. The bad things that we do, really create problems for us, which I think is quite important. And we don't realize that sometimes, that, the good that we do comes back to us. The bad that we do comes back to us. Ultimately, if God is just, then God holds us accountable for our actions and our punishments. And we may look at people and say, but look at that person over there. He's done some terrible, terrible things, but he's not getting rewarded. In fact, he's got a big house, he's got a big car. The idea is, he may have that reward in this life, but in the world to come, God's justice will prevail. And those of us that have done the right kinds of
wealth,
things do that.
Pleasure, status, fame, these could be actually a trial for an individual.
Absolutely. And in a funny way, it's having that money. I remember, not to get too far off topic, but as a graduate student, my supervisor said to me, you're moving from being a graduate student to being a professor, an academic. And you're going to have problems, not because you don't have money, but because you have money. And I looked at him, I thought, this man is crazy. I'm a poor graduate student, I don't have any money. I'm going to love it when I have a full-time job. And then you begin to realize, oh yeah, now that you have a full-time job, now there's these responsibilities, now I have to think about this, now I have to think about that, now those kinds of things. So in a funny way, those things that we might want, and we all want wealth, we all want success, but sometimes there are problems with that. I tell my students, you're complaining about the work that you have to do as undergraduates. This is one of the best times in your life. Enjoy what you've got here, because you'll be married, you have a family, you have to deal with those kinds of responsibilities, you have to do work, and so the education can be a wonderful kind of opportunity. So again, I didn't mean that as an excursus, but that idea that all these things are trials, and they're temporal. You can be the wealthiest person in the world, you can have all the money in the bank, you're not going to be able to take that with you. The only thing that exists forever, the only thing that survives forever, the Quran tells us, is God, is the faith of God. Everything else will perish, everything else will pass away.
Dr. Hussain, we're going to take a break now. Please stay with us, as we'll be back momentarily. We wish to hear from you, so please forward your comments to perspectives@ebru.tv. Thanks for staying with us. We are back with Dr. Amir Hussain discussing death and afterlife in Islam. Dr. Hussain, why is there a Judgment Day?
I think the notion of the Judgment Day goes back to that basic principle of the justice of God. That, I think when Muslims read the Quran, it really is about God's justice. The paradigmatic story in the Quran is the story of Moses and Pharaoh. Here is Moses, who is God's prophet, who represents justice, struggling against the injustice of Pharaoh, an earthly ruler. And it's that notion of judgment, that human judgments may be wrong, human judgments may be problematic. You may have a judge that misunderstands a case. You may have a murderer that isn't punished for the murder that they've done. The idea is that God, of course, is that perfect judge, is, of course, that perfect justice. And so the judgment day really is about the justice of God, that, we are given this incredible gift by God, which is our free will. God allows us to do what we want to do. Otherwise, we could say, well, I have no control over this. God destined me to be a murderer. God destined me to be, an embezzler, that kind of thing. I have no control. Of course we have control. We have choices. God tells us how we should live in the world. God gives us guidance through God's prophets. But we have free will. Satan is allowed to work in the world to tempt us. The judgment is the end of that. We will be judged based on how we lived this life. Given that we had free will, God's justice allows for those who were punished, those who did wicked things to be punished, those who did good things to be rewarded. So the judgment day idea, I think, is crucial to the notion of the justice of God. Why do this? Why not try to make as much money? Why not try to hurt people? You don't care, you want to have the biggest house, you want to have the wealthiest, you want to be the wealthiest person in the world. You don't care who gets in your way, you'll crush them because what's important is your own needs. The idea here is that you may have that wonderful life, and that life may last for 70, 80, 90 years, but the world to come, God will judge you. That's where you get your true reward. That's where you get the true punishment for things.
Is it consoling for individuals to believe that individuals who are oppressed, individual like Hitler comes to mind, where he's killed millions of individuals, and is it consoling to believe in a resurrection, a judgment day where God is going to judge individuals and bring them to judgment?
Absolutely. That the idea that no one escapes God's judgment, that human beings may escape judgment. Someone like Hitler, this evil man of the 20th century, who gets to escape human justice because he kills himself, he commits suicide. But the idea that he'll get God's justice. And we see examples all the time of people that we know are guilty, people who have done terrible, terrible things, who live freely among us and may prosper, but in the world to come, they will get that punishment for what they deserve. In the same way, it's that sense of reunion, because we look at things in this world that are temporal. We love our parents, we love our family, but we know that everyone who is born eventually is going to die. And we don't want that. We want our families to always be with us. We want the people we love to always be with us. And the idea here is that, of course, in heaven, you have that. It's not just that you're together for a short period of time with those people that you love who care for you, but you're with them eternally. And that sense of, you may be in this life oppressed, and you do what you can to fight against that, but you may not be able to. In the world to come, God will reward you for how you lived this life and the things that you did.
What are the intercessory roles of prophets in general and of Prophet Muhammad in particular?
Yeah. In the Islamic tradition, you certainly had that notion of the prophets as the ones who are guided by God. And the Prophet Muhammad, as Muslims know, of course, is not the only prophet, is not the first prophet. He's the last in a long line of prophets. And he's important because he is the one who was given the Quran, which Muslims believe to be the very word of God. In that sense, he's elevated. I don't mean to say that, he's greater than the other prophets in that kind of way, because all the prophets, of course, are great. But he's the last one. He's what the Quran calls the seal of the prophets. All of the prophets, of course, can intercede for people, because these are people who have done extraordinary things. The Prophet Muhammad, as the seal of the prophets, of course, has that ultimate, God, of course, has the ultimate intercessory capacity, but the Prophet can intercede on our behalf. And he's told us this a number of times in a number of hadith, my favorite one being that the Prophet will intercede for everyone who says, La ilaha illallah, there's no God but God, that's what you have to have. And with that, the Prophet will intercede for you. Because again, every one of us has done things that aren't Great. Even the best person in the world has had moments where they've done things in anger, where in despair they may have said something, and we need that intercession because, of course, we're human. We're not perfect. Only God is perfect. Only God is the one that has never made, any kinds of mistakes in any kind of way there. And so we need those good people, those great people, like the prophets, particularly the Prophet Muhammad, to, on our behalf, intercede with God. And the prophet has told us that he will do this. God has told us that God himself will listen to this intercession.
Can you elaborate on that tradition where on the Judgment Day, Muhammad mentions individuals, groups of people going to prophets seeking intercession from them, and the prophet would tell the group to go to another prophet?
I mean, this goes to examples in the prophet's own life. If you look at the Miraj, the ascension, the prophet goes from Mecca to Jerusalem, and from Jerusalem ascends up to heaven.
Yes.
And as he's ascending to the different levels, 7 in the Islamic tradition, he encounters different prophets, and it's Moses who is the prophet that's mentioned most by name, who is this really powerful sort of person. And the idea here is that, of course, different groups of people will ask prophets to intercede on their behalf, that Moses isn't just simply a prophet for Muslims, he's a prophet for Jews and Christians as well. That Jesus, who's a very important prophet for Muslims, of course, is important for Christians as well. And that you can go to particular prophets, ask them to intercede for you, but the one who has the chief power of intercession, of course, is the Prophet Muhammad, who will intercede for his community, which of course is all of us who are Muslims, who believe in the first part of the Shahada, La ilaha illallah, but also in the second part, Wa Muhammadun Rasulullah, and Muhammad is the messenger of God. And so that sense, that importance, one of the questions that the angel asks us in the grave, who is your prophet? It's the Prophet Muhammad. Not that he's the only prophet, of course, but that he's the one that brings that final revelation. He's the one that's given that sort of final human arbitration over things.
What does the Quran say about the life that awaits a faithful in heaven?
The Quran is so rich in its description of heaven, and it's very much a sensual kind of heaven. In a funny way, if you looked at Victorian critics of Islam, in the 18th, 19th century, one of their concerns was that Islam was too sensual. This Quran talks about so many sensual kinds of things, which, for certain people may have been a bad thing, I think, for us as human beings, because we are human beings. Our senses are so important to us. Pleasure is so important to us, but done in a good way. And in the Quran, when it talks about the world to come, when it talks about heaven, it talks in very sensual terms. Gardens. You imagine people living in a desert, and gardens with trees, with shade, with the fragrance of the plants. It talks about rivers of milk, rivers of honey, rivers of water. The idea that all of our needs are met there in heaven. All the things that we can think of, and that goes back to what we were talking about before. We look for all these things in this life. We want to have a nice house. We want to have a house with a garden. We want to have a house that is by the water. Well, here's heaven, which is a bigger house than any one of us can imagine, that has all of those things. So in this life, you may have been poor. You may have lived in a small apartment somewhere that was cramped, that was crowded. But in the world to come, you get that eternal paradise. You get the companions, the people that you've longed to see, not just within your own family, but historically. There's a chance to meet and talk with the prophets. There's a chance to meet and talk with these wonderful religious figures. All of the glory of that's eternal. There in the world to come, we have this wonderful life, even if we may not have had such a wonderful life here on earth, if we were poor through no fault of our own, if we tried to work hard but we just couldn't succeed in this world and didn't get the big house on the hill. You get that in paradise.
In our modern age, it appears that beyond pleasure and thrill-seeking, life has lost its meaning. How does the resurrection and afterlife bring meaning to our lives according to Islam?
I think what you touched on is the key there, that it's how we live this life that's the key, and so that gives meaning here. why do we do the things that we do? Why should we treat people with respect? It's very easy to respect people who are in power over us. It's very easy for me to be nice to my boss. It's very easy for me to be polite to a key person in my university. How do I treat those people that have no power over me? I think to me that's always been the key here. How do we treat each other? What would it be like if we treated each other with a tremendous amount of respect? What would it be like if we thought we were being judged by our actions? Because of course we are. I think there's a sense of the world to come gives meaning to this life. In that sense, how is it that you treat people? Because that's going to be counted out later. It's you go to a party and you don't realize that you're going to be judged on how you treat people at that party, at that event. Well, this is what this life is. So there's that. The other part of it is the sense that in this life we may, through no fault of our own, not succeed. We may have a disease. We may be poor. We may live in a country where we're oppressed by our ruler. That's not our fault, if you will. We try to do what we can, and we don't succeed at that. In the world to come, we will get that reward for it. And so the idea is that your struggles here are meaningful. It's not that they're meaningless. It's not that this life doesn't matter. How you live this life doesn't matter. How you live this life does matter, because it's how you live this life that determines what happens to us in the world to come. So I think in that sense too, it provides a tremendous amount of meaning for our lives.
Dr. Hussain, our program is coming to an end. Are there any last remarks you would like to make to our viewers?
I think just the idea that for us as Muslims, the world to come is crucial, and it affects how we live our lives. Treat this world as if it was temporal. Treat the world to come as if it was eternal, because of course that's the case. How do we live in this world determines what happens in the world to come, and the meaning that our lives hold is, I think, a tremendous one for us.
How have Muslims respected this injunction of Islam?
I think they've done it in lots of different ways, by doing charitable works, doing things, setting up institutions here in this world. It is our responsibility to take care of each other. It is our responsibility to take care of the poor, one of the 5 pillars of Islam, zakat, giving to charity. That becomes a crucial kind of thing. Educational systems, how do you set up those things? The glory, I say this as an educator, for me of the Islamic world was its educational system. Wonderful centers of learning that we establish. The idea that we educate people is absolutely crucial. One of my favorite hadiths of the Prophet: seek knowledge, though you find it in China. Go to the end of the world. Go to China, which at that point is the end of the known world, to search for knowledge. Help people to live a better life in this world, but know that this world isn't the be-all and end-all. It's the world to come that's important, and work towards that world.
Dr. Hussain, it was a pleasure having you on our program.
Thank you.
That's it for now. For Perspectives on Faith, I'm Metin Teke. Until next time, goodbye.